right, good morning everyone. Welcome to Walk with the Doc, January 2026. We start off a new year. All right, thanks for everyone for coming out. So the topic today is how to do CPR in space and prevent sudden cardiac arrest here on Earth. So I think we'd all agree that most astronauts, people that are doing space missions, are at pretty low risk for heart problems. You know, it's a pretty rigorous process to become an astronaut. In 2024, 8,000 people applied to become an astronaut. Only 10 were chosen. It's very selective. They want people, they want certain characteristics. Certainly you've got to be in top physical health, no heart problems, high blood pressure, or anything like that. Even after you're chosen, there's a year-long process where you're doing intensive physical training. So there's a lot to go into this. And again, these people are probably the fittest people that we have to go up into space. Despite that, certainly somebody could have a heart problem, they could go into cardiac arrest. What would happen if that's the case, if they do that up in International Space Station? Would they be able to do CPR, cardiopulmonary resuscitation? And how can astronauts and those of us who are stuck here on Earth lower our risk for sudden cardiac arrest? So that's what we'll talk about today. So sudden cardiac arrest is an irregular rhythm from the lower chamber of the heart. It's very common. It's often the first manifestation of heart disease, as we'll learn in a few minutes. Usually it's from ventricular fibrillation. That means the lower chambers, instead of pumping and beating normally, fibrillate. They do this. And when they do that, the blood doesn't get pumped well out to the body. They don't get flow to the brain or the vital organs. And if it's not treated, it leads to death pretty rapidly. So again, sudden cardiac arrest affects more than 300,000 people per year in the US. And the death rate is 90%. It's huge. The way we treat sudden cardiac arrest is through prompt CPR, cardiopulmonary resuscitation, pressing on the chest to establish or help with blood flow to the brain and the vital organs. The definitive treatment is defibrillation, doing a shock to the heart to try to wipe out the heart rhythm and get it back into a normal rhythm. Usually that's done with an AED, an automatic external defibrillator, and we passed a few of them here in the mall as we were walking. There's 3 of them. Now, as cardiologists, we assess people and we can figure out which patients are at high risk for sudden cardiac arrest. And usually those patients are patients that have had prior heart attack, previous cardiac arrest, congestive heart failure, low ejection fraction under 30%. But those high-risk patients are only a small proportion of the people that have sudden cardiac arrest each year. On the second page, I gave you all the data. Okay? So the high-risk folks are in the top graph in this red box. EF less than 30%, heart failure. But as you can probably see, the number of events of sudden cardiac arrest are pretty low. And the percentages are down at the bottom. So the high-risk folks only account for 5 to 15% of all the cardiac arrests in the US. Now look up on top, in the blue box is the general population. That's people walking around the mall or out in the neighborhood or wherever, and they suffer cardiac arrest. Look at the percentages. It's more than 50% of the total. So that's the problem. How do we figure out who to predict will have cardiac arrest, how to try to prevent it from happening? So as we alluded to, and I think as we can all agree, astronauts are pretty low risk for sudden cardiac arrest, but it's not going to be zero. Something can happen. These guys are out in space for a year. They're going to go to Mars at some point. They're going to be out there for a long time. Something certainly could happen. If an astronaut goes into cardiac arrest, how would CPR be done? Normally here on Earth, in traditional CPR, we lay the victim down, we start pressing on the chest, try to get the blood flow going, but that relies a lot on gravity. Now there's no gravity in space, so how would you do it? NASA recommends that the rescuer stands behind the person, does a bear hug, and starts pressing the chest. Something like the Heimlich maneuver, except instead of short thrusts to the abdomen, it's continuous thrusts to the chest. And there's other astronauts around. The rescuer and the victim then get moved to a special room in the space station that has medical equipment, where the victim is strapped down so they're not floating in space, and compressions can continue. This is how they do it. It's on the third page, and I gave you a picture of that. So in the picture, this is the medical room. In the black, that's supposed to be where the patient will get strapped down. The white is representing, where they're going to do CPR. So as you can see, this astronaut has his hands on what would be the chest, and his feet's on the ceiling. So he's pressing down on the ceiling, pressing down on the chest. So as you can imagine, that's not the best way to do CPR. You can't get good depth to that. It's not as good as doing CPR here on Earth, but it's what you can do. One way around this would be to use a Lucas device. Lucas is a chest compression system, and I have a picture of that on the same page just below that. It's a machine with a piston. They put it onto a victim's chest, and the machine provides compressions, goes to the right depth, goes at the right rate. Because as you can imagine, when we do CPR out in the field, people are pressing on the chest. The depth they go down isn't always the same, maybe even not ideal. People get tired, you have to switch rescuers every couple of minutes. The machine, you just put it on and turn it on and it goes. It goes to the right depth, keeps going, it's not going to get tired. Now if you want to see how that works, I would suggest you look up something called The Pit on TV. The Pit's show a fictional ER in Pittsburgh. If you look at season 1, episode 1, they have somebody coming in with cardiac arrest and they have the Lucas device going. It's a simulation, but boy, is it real to life. I've seen it used in the ER, and it's very real to life. So if you're interested, and it's a good show anyway, you can check it out. So, getting back to astronauts, this came along in my feed this week. This week in the International Space Station, there was an astronaut that had what they called a stable medical situation. And they're actually bringing the crew back home. So apparently it's the first time in the 25-year history of the space station that there's a medical emergency bad enough to bring people back. Now we haven't had a cardiac arrest in space that we know of. We don't know what the medical situation is here, but other things have happened in space too. When I've been researching this for the article here, the article I read had mentioned that, sometimes the astronauts will get blood clots. They had a blood clot in the clavicle at one point. And you can imagine, they're out in space for a long time. If you get a blood clot, you get a heart attack, you get cardiac arrest. So it's not out of the realm that something could happen when we're out in space. But we're not out in space. Probably won't be, I guess. How do we here on Earth try to figure out and lower our risk for cardiac arrest? So the first thing we'll talk about is the fact that the incidence of cardiac arrest has actually been going down over the past 20 years, which is a good thing. The CARES network is a national registry. It covers 40 states, and it looks at cardiac arrests through the country. And you have the data here on the bottom. So over the period between 2021 and 2024, overall survival improved from 9% to 11%. It's a good progression. Public AED use increased from 10 to 13%, which probably accounts for the better survival. And about 40% of bystanders start CPR, which has been pretty stable. So we're getting better in terms of treating, recognizing, and getting people to survival over the past 20 years. But how do we prevent it? There was a large study that came out, I said this year, it's actually last year, 2025. The study looked at 500,000 people, average age 56, so pretty young, half were women. And the study showed that risk factors for sudden cardiac arrest can be quantified. A lot of them fell into the American Heart Association's Life Essential 8. Those are 8 risk factors that we already know about and talk about reducing. They're already associated with underlying heart disease, heart attacks, and so on. But now it's associated with sudden cardiac arrest as well. Those 8 risk factors are diet high in fat, low in fruits and vegetables, activity, sedentary lifestyle, active smoking, sleeping less than 7 hours a day, obesity, a high body mass index, high waist circumference, high cholesterol, diabetes, high blood pressure. Again, we know all these risk factors, but now it's associated with sudden cardiac arrest as well, which isn't surprising. The study also found some additional novel risk factors, including depression, social isolation, low education level, increased arm fat, reduced grip strength, that's a measure of frailty, so if your grip strength goes down, you're getting weaker overall, and air pollution. Now, if you've been to some of my talks, you look at some of the risk factors for heart disease, a lot of these have popped up with just overall risks for heart disease. Depression, isolation, frailty, air pollution, none of these are novel overall for heart disease. One thing that struck me was this increased arm fat too. I hadn't seen that before. I was trying to look through the article to see how they define that, but I wasn't able to assess that. So if I do find that, I'll let you know and get back to you next month. And everyone's checking their arm fat back there. Sorry. So now, what can we do with this information? Now we know that we can all respond to sudden cardiac arrest, do CPR anywhere in the universe. So if you find yourself on Mars, you'd be well equipped. And if you're an astronaut, or if you want to become a space tourist, or if you just want to lower your risk for sudden cardiac arrest here on Earth, these are the risk factors we got to work on. They all are lowering those risk factors will decrease the risk for cardiac arrest and overall heart disease. The study that I'm alluding to said that if those risk factors could be reduced by 40 to 60%, the risk of cardiac arrest will go down by 40 to 60%. It's huge. And if you're planning on becoming a space tourist, maybe you want to take a Lucas device on board with you just in case, just to be safe. So thanks for coming out, everybody. I put the calendar down as well here. So February 7th, over at the hospital, we'll do our annual student athlete screening for cardiac arrest. I'll give you some information. We screen the student athletes, see what their risk for sudden cardiac arrest is. We've been doing it for 16 years now. Our next walk with the doc will be Valentine's Day, the 14th here, same time and everything here. Later that day, the 14th, the hospital does a fashion show downstairs in the courtyard. And that's always a fun thing to do as well, so put it on your calendar. So thanks for coming out. I'll do questions in a second.